Let's take a look at a typical Carboniferous seascape. What plant and animal species inhabit this underwater setting? First of all, as you now know, the epicontinental sea that formed in the Carboniferous favored the creation of a new biotope. The waters here are shallow, 200 meters or 700 feet at most. But this region of the ocean benefits from the sun's luminosity and warmth. Corals quickly establish themselves here. Everything is in place to encourage their growth. Whether solitary or colonial, they build extensive reefs in the warm waters of the Paleothis. These in turn encourage the expansion of other species. Brachiopods such as this Productus greatly appreciate this marine region. It lives and feeds on the seabed. The small spines that can be seen in the dorsal valve are not a defensive weapon against predators. For that, the shell is the only protection it has. The spines, on the other hand, are useful for holding on tightly to the bottom. In brachiopods, these spines can be more or less prominent, depending on whether the substrate is muddy or hard. The genus Productus was quite diverse in the Carboniferous. Here we see a Productus giganteus, here a Productus subaculeatus, and over there a Productus cora or a Productus punctatus. The giganteus is undoubtedly the most exceptional of these. Scientists believe it to be the largest brachiopoda ever to have lived on our planet. It could reach 30 to 35 centimeters, or 13 inches. Like the other members of its group, it naturally occupies the seabed, preferring shallow, muddy waters. Aside from this preferred location, this brachiopod adapts to all regions. It can be found in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Buried in sand or mud, its imposing size, weight, and sturdy spines give it great stability in the water. Waves do not prevent it from remaining firmly attached to its substrate. Unable to move, this sessile animal has a diet adapted to its own physical limitations. It feeds by filtration to extract suspended phytoplankton. For this reason, it settles in shallow waters that take full advantage of the sun's rays. Its favorite food, phytoplankton, thrives here. To extract these planktonic particles, it uses an organ called a lophophore. The lophophore surrounds the mouth. It's a highly efficient system, a real collector of suspended particles. The lophophore is made up of tentacles and can take on a variety of shapes: ring-shaped, horseshoe-shaped, or coiled. It's hollow and silated, so it can catch particles. One problem with being fixed is reproduction. In Giganteus, scientists believe that gametes are released into the water column. Other suspension-feeding sessile animals are the blastoids, notably the yellow blastoid, such as Orophycrinus, and the crinoids, such as the red crinoid. Let's start with the blastoids. These are part of the so-called echinoderms. The echinoderm is characterized by a body protected by a set of interlocking, firmly welded limestone plates. These plates form what is known as a theca, a hard, mineralized, very solid envelope. In these animals, the mouth is in the center, but all around it, like petals around a flower pistil, are mouth depressions. These have two important roles to play. Firstly, they support the filtering organs called brachioles. Secondly, They also contain the animal's respiratory pores. This is not the only echinoderm present here. Another member of this group evolves very close to our blastoid. Do you notice it? It has a very distinct shape and blends in so well with the scenery that you could walk right past it without thinking for a second that it's an animal. In fact, it looks more like a plant, but if you get a little closer, you'll see that it's actually a marine animal with an articulated limestone skeleton. It also has a kind of root to anchor itself to the ground, and a calyx with long, flexible arms to filter the plankton it feeds on from the water. Or should we say, feed on in the plural, since they rarely live in isolation from one another. Have these precious clues put you on the right track? This famous echinoderm, the king of camouflage, is a crinoid, and more precisely, right in front of us is a red crinoid. The filtration system of crinoids is quite different from that of blastoids. They filter seawater by fanning out their arms. They then transport the plankton to their mouths by means of tiny cilia covering the arms. These cilia are called pinnules. Depending on the species, the arms can measure up to 50 centimeters or 20 inches long. Here we can estimate a length of 30 centimeters or 12 inches. Unlike other parts of its body, the crinoid's pinnules are soft. They are the only part of the body without a calcified skeleton, to ensure flexibility of movement and therefore perfect optimization of filtration. And as if that weren't enough, to be sure of winning every time, these pinnules secrete a sticky glue. A formidable plankton magnet, this ability enables it to find food in abundance in this sunny part of the ocean. But in the sea, there are still a multitude of animals of all shapes and sizes to be discovered. Take this mollusk, for example. It's a cephalopod, to be precise. You may remember that this genus, the gonionites, diversified greatly during the Devonian. This continued into the Carboniferous. In fact, this is the period when they developed and diversified the most. Gonionites are marine animals with shells. Their shells are highly distinctive. Unlike others, they have several chambers within the shell, separated by zigzag-shaped sutures. If you look closely, you can see that one of these chambers is larger than the others. This is where the cephalopod lives. But the other chambers, while not used as living quarters, do have their uses. Each of them, filled with gas, plays a hydrostatic role. Thanks to this physical property, gonionites can swim in open water and maintain a pressure balance as required. They are said to be nectonic. Unlike plankton, nekton can swim, even against the current. On the other hand, they are far from being able to compete with fish. They are not equipped for fast swimming, nor are they renowned for any particular skill. But that doesn't seem to bother him in the least. He's adapted to his condition and sets off in search of food. Sight is his guide. The cephalopod has two rather well-developed eyes. It also has tentacles, no doubt useful for feeding. This, at least, is the hypothesis put forward by paleobiologists. In fact, despite the few fossils in the possession of museums, scientists are faced with an unanswered question when it comes to the lifestyle and diet of gonionites. There are no sufficiently convincing clues that these animals had a benthic lifestyle, for example. There is very little evidence to support a reliable hypothesis about the diet of gonionites. The only thing we can be sure of is that they lack the calcified, beaked jaws of some of their relatives. We can therefore rule out hard-shelled and shell-bearing animals from their diet. While many marine species take advantage of these shallow waters to diversify, some are in decline. The number of marine arthropods has fallen drastically. This is particularly true of trilobites. But some are luckier than others. Some arthropods, for the time being at least, endure despite the difficulties facing the genus. This is a megarachne, a eurypterid. Aquatic or semi-aquatic, we don't really know. It measures nearly 60 centimeters or 24 inches when its legs are extended. But we'll meet it a little later in the trip. Not far away, a little deeper, we should be able to spot other marine species. As we were saying, marine animals come in all shapes and sizes. As you can see, the corals are home to quite different species from what we've seen so far. This time, no shells, no calcified skeletons either, but fins. Look, here we are in front of a shoal of Uranothus. They seem to enjoy swimming in the midst of these days of yellow blastoids and red crinoids undulating in the current. Unfortunately for these fish, they'll have to postpone their nautical activities and think about protecting themselves quickly from the approaching predator. The mastodon you see now is a member of the Stethocanthus genus. If we have doubts about the diet of the gonionites, we know pretty well the diet of the predator that will follow, Acmonistion zangrelli. Stethocanthus is an extinct genus of primitive holocephalus. It is one of the first cartilaginous fish to have lived on our planet, along with Cladocelicae and Gladbachus. This makes it one of the oldest sharks on the planet. But this prestigious title doesn't seem to dampen his ardor. He's on the hunt. Stethocanthus is a predator that thrives in both fresh and salt water, where we also find ourselves. Measuring up to 2 meters or 7 feet for the largest, it is quite similar to our contemporary sharks. Its name means anvil shark. As you can imagine, this name is inspired by its distinctive morphology. You can clearly see the anvil-shaped fin on its back. However, this is not the case for females. Only the males display this prominence. Why did males have this distinctive dorsal fin? There are 2 possibilities. The first suggests that it was used to attract the attention of females. The second suggests that it was an advantage for males when they had to fight each other to establish their position and conquer a female. This primitive shark lived in shallow waters, mainly coastal areas. It feeds on crustaceans and mollusks, but also on fish. Contrary to popular belief, not all cartilaginous animals are sharks, nor are they all large fish. To understand this, let's go a little deeper into the ocean. The fish we're about to meet are particularly fond of the deep sea. Here we can observe a school of Falcatus, another holocephalus. It has very large eyes. Do you know why? It's very dark here. We're no longer in the photic part of the ocean. These big eyes are very useful for seeing clearly in such darkness. It also has a homocercal tail fin. The caudal fin is located at the rear end of the fish. There are 4 forms of caudal fin. The homocercal form means that it is symmetrical with two equal lobes. The caudal fin is remarkably well developed in Falcatus. In other words, he must have been an outstanding swimmer. The shrimps that move here and there will undoubtedly serve as his breakfast. He loves these little creatures. Before leaving, did you notice anything else peculiar about him? The thorn. You're probably wondering what that thorn on his back is for. Is it really just for shrimping? No, it's something else. Like our previous shark, Falcatus also has a very distinctive sexual dimorphism. Only males have this dorsal fin, with a sort of spine projecting forward. Now it's time to head back up to the light. It's nice to be back in a more familiar landscape, illuminated by the sun's rays breaking through the surface. We see corals, algae, echinoderms, blastoids, and many other small marine animals. Suddenly, the ocean is much more welcoming and reassuring. A few mollusks, crustaceans, and a variety of small fish wander through this thriving ecosystem. But small prey galore also means predators on the prowl. One of them is approaching, and the weaker ones are already panicking. They're right to be scared. There are big marine predators in the Carboniferous. Here it comes. This one belongs to the genus Chondrichthyans, i.e. cartilaginous fishes, and to the group of elasmobranchs that include sharks, rays, and sawfish in the order Selaceae. Unlike sharks, it does not belong to the Selaceae order, but to the Tenacanthiform, which means dragon shark. Sharks and dragon sharks have much in common, including 5 to 7 pairs of gill slits opening individually outwards, rigid dorsal fins, and small, placoid scales on the skin. The major difference between the two lies in the dorsal fins. These are made up of spines. The spines on the fins of Dracopristis, the specimen in front of us, were very large, measuring just over 55 centimeters or 22 inches long, i.e. around 25% of the total body length. Lurking at the bottom of the water, Dracopristis had to watch its back and protect itself from danger. Semi-buried in the ground, it can easily be attacked by a more powerful and imposing predator, such as Glycmanius occidentalis. Thanks to its famous prominent spines, it can counter attacks. The surprise effect when the predator rubs against the thorn in its mouth can give Dracopristis a few seconds to react. Dentition and mouth opening also present some distinctions between Selaceae and Tenacanthiform, or if you prefer to call them that, between sharks and dragon sharks. Let's take the dentition of Dracopristis as a control for our comparative study. Its teeth are adapted to seize and crush its prey. The dentition consists of a long blade-like tooth, surrounded by numerous short fork-like teeth. It has 12 rows of teeth. Its teeth are designed to catch food and swallow it whole. There's no room for chance. The victim has very little chance of escaping alive. Sharks also have several rows of teeth, but they have a different shape, and there aren't several small teeth around a large blade, as here. The opening of this lethal weapon is also larger in Tenacanthiform, i.e. in Dracopristis, than in sharks. On the other hand, it is less flexible. many sharks inhabit the ocean, we've already seen several types, as well as closely related creatures. Sharks appeared much earlier, in the Ordovician period, but they never managed to make their mark against other predators. The Carboniferous period is known as the Golden Age of Sharks. It was their extinction at the end of the Devonian period that allowed them to become the kings of the ocean. The extinctions, so to speak, cleaned up the big predators. A vacant spot in the ocean was quickly filled by the shark group. They were then able to dominate the marine waters and give birth to a whole variety of forms as they diversified. While all the species we've seen so far live underwater, others haven't managed to choose between land and sea. Amphibians, or at least some of them, seem to enjoy both environments without distinction. It's with them that we'll be making our transition from aquatic to terrestrial life. We'll be taking our first steps on land, but for some time to come, we'll be avoiding going deeper into the continent. It's too early to survive in these distant lands. The forest hasn't hatched yet. It's dormant. It's getting ready. In the meantime, let's continue our journey along the coast and through the swamps. How did amphibians come to divide themselves between two worlds? By the end of the Devonian period, we had witnessed a major radiation of fish. Several hypotheses have been put forward as to the causes of these changes and evolutions. For them, answering the call of the continent had become inevitable for a number of reasons. Scientists point to two main plausible causes: to protect themselves from new predators, notably sharks, and to get around in waterways where the water level is very low and the tangle of branches and roots greatly hinders movement. Don't forget that the forest is gradually but surely taking root. For the moment, it can only do so in wetlands. This is a good thing for life on the mainland, but it does make things difficult for some fish. To get out of this predicament, these swimmers are starting to develop legs. Of course, at first, they're more like pseudopterans, but the machine has been set in motion. Without this evolution, there would probably be no amphibians, reptiles, birds, or even mammals on Earth. The appearance of legs brought with it a veritable revolution in the animals that would soon populate our planet. Alongside legs, the ability to breathe out of water was also discussed. Without this ability, walking on land would have been utopian. Sarcopterygians, bony fish with a swim bladder, a lung in short, are going to divert this organ from its original purpose. Initially dedicated to maintaining equilibrium in the water, lungs can now also be used to breathe the oxygen contained in the air. Nevertheless, these animals of a different kind still need the aquatic environment to live. Exclusive terrestrial life has not yet been fully conquered. The question of reproduction and the fragility of the egg, for example, is one of the reasons why exclusive terrestrial life is impossible. That's where we left off in our investigations at this stage in the evolutionary process of fish and pre-amphibians at the end of the Devonian. Let's resume our study of this conquest of the land with the now much more developed amphibians of the Carboniferous. The amphibians of this period are known as stegocephali, meaning head with plates. We're going to have to find them. Their morphology is quite remarkable, but they also know how to blend into the background. Let's start with a rather terrestrial animal, which we're sure will be easier to flush out. This is Balaenoptera woody. It feeds on insects. We should be able to find them in the vegetation cover near this stream. Well, here's one. It's barely 20 centimeters or 8 inches long, but you can clearly see its long body, legs, and head. It's precisely at the back of its head that it has a large tympanic opening. This means that its hearing is well developed, even in the open air. Unlike some specimens found at the end of the Devonian period, our Balaenoptera has very strong bones. He's quite capable of supporting his weight and his movements out of the water. He looks like a salamander. His head, rather round and flat, but also his posture, give him this apparent resemblance. It has around 40 teeth on its upper jaw and 20 on its lower, making it an accomplished carnivore. Insects are its favorite diet. It was one of the first temnospondyls. This group has long withstood the many changes on our planet, and even certain biological crises. It survived until the Cretaceous period, when it was present on Earth for almost 220 million years. They lived much longer than the dinosaurs, for example, which are often used as a benchmark for comparing longevity. Let's continue our exploration. We're approaching a swamp. Unlike the first, this one has no legs. It lost them as it evolved. This may seem totally implausible to you, but tetrapods have repeatedly lost and regained their limbs over the course of biological evolution. Life knows how to adapt when necessary. Tetrapods are no exception. But let's get back to the swamp and the animal we're concerned with. It's an Ophiderpeton. It looks more like a snake and is quite long, close to 70 centimeters or 28 inches when fully grown. Now that you've got his picture in your head, you shouldn't miss him. Yes, it's really him. Ophiderpeton brownreyi. It has no fewer than 230 vertebrae. His large forward-facing eyes guide his hunt. He hides in the hollow of a burrow and comes out when hunger strikes. Insects, worms, millipedes, anything of reasonable size will fit in its mouth. Other amphibians also live in the area, but you have to leave the marshy area and approach the lake to catch a glimpse of them. You'll see that this body of fresh water is also teeming with life. This is Microbrachus. He too looks like a salamander. However, it has a total of 40 vertebrae and short limbs. This skeleton is not conducive to swimming. It does, however, manage with a body undulation system. It's not fast, but the technique is effective. In addition to the salamander, Microbrachus also closely resembles the axolotl. Do you notice the little membranes on the sides of its head? These are the remains of its larval gills. He keeps them as an adult. A little further on, we can see Amphibamus grandiceps. This time, at first glance, it's clear that it belongs to the amphibian group. The body is stockier and the head more triangular. It measures around 20 centimeters or 8 inches. When you look at its skeleton, it's easy to see how it can move. Its legs and long clawed toes help it to move on the ground. In the water, it's the tail that stands out. It's shaped like an oar and becomes a precious asset for getting around in open water. So it has two possible means of locomotion. He juggles between one and the other according to his needs. I'd like you to ask yourself about these two possibilities. Why live both in the water and on land? They have legs and lungs, so why don't they conquer the ground out of wetlands, lakes, rivers, and swamps? Every animal ability in nature has an origin, a raison d'être. If these animals preserve their aquatic and terrestrial abilities, it's for a good reason. The survival of a species depends on more than the availability of food. Without food, there is no energy. Without energy, the body withers and dies. But the survival of a species also depends on its ability to reproduce. It must be able to reproduce under the right conditions and multiply births so that the younger generation replaces the older. But for these animals, nothing is simple at the moment. Without the aquatic environment, embryos cannot survive. Another major revolution is now underway to counter this problem facing nature, the amniotic egg. To understand this revolution, we need to take a closer look at the amniotic egg. Here's a Hylonomus laeli, quite similar to our present-day lizards, and one of the very first amniotes. The amnion is a protective envelope. Inside is the embryo, of course, but also the amniotic fluid. In other words, it's as if the liquid environment has invited itself into the egg. The embryo is protected in this precious liquid. It can develop without fear. The amnion protects the embryo liquid unit. External pressure and desiccation are no longer an obstacle to the birth of life on Earth. An egg can finally survive on dry land. Beings like Hylonomus laeli can now move away from wetlands and into the forest. Their bodies have also adapted to this new way of life. Look at the skin. It no longer looks as moist or even viscous as the previous amphibians we met. It's drier. It's also tighter, making it easier to fight dehydration. In other words, when Hylonomus approaches a watering hole, it's only to drink when it's thirsty, but not for breeding purposes. Hylonomus wasn't the only amniote to live in the Carboniferous. Petrolacosaurus is also widely present. It's an important encounter because, according to some scientists, it's one of the oldest diapsids known. It may even have given rise to crocodiles, dinosaurs, and since birds are descended from it, even birds. In fact, diapsids are a clade of amniote tetrapods from the Therapsid clade, which includes all present-day birds and reptiles. One of the great particularities of diapsids is that their skulls have two pairs of temporal fossae, i.e. two openings. The squamosal and postorbital bones separate them. These openings allow the jaws to lock in a closed position, giving them greater strength when bitten. It fed on small forest insects. This little lizard-like animal ran faster than other species, especially on the ground. And lucky for him, despite being only 40 centimeters or 16 inches long, it was the prey of giants, such as Megarachne, and its 35 centimeter or 14-inch diameter. Meganeura and its 70 centimeter or 28-inch wingspan, or in a completely different genre, giant amphibians such as Proterogerinus. Let's close our tour of the land of amniotes with a synapsid. This is Archaeopteryx, the oldest known synapsid, along with the Chinerpeton. According to some paleobiologists, it is probably the distant ancestor of mammals. Archaeopteryx had strong jaws that could open wider than those of early reptiles. While its sharp teeth were all the same shape, it also had a pair of canines that were more enlarged than the other teeth. He lives here, at the edge of this Lepidodendron forest. Speaking of forests, I think it's time we learn more about this new plant cover, don't you? Judging by the landscape in which this Archaeopteryx is growing, it seems to have developed quite well. While we were roaming the ocean and taking our first steps on the coast, a lot was happening on the continent. At the dawn of the Carboniferous, the forest was in its infancy. Now it covers a large part of the continent. It is a new ecosystem in its own right, providing food and shelter for many species of animals of all shapes and sizes. Our Archaeopteryx, for example, has found everything it needs to survive here. Before we go a little deeper into the coal forest, let's take a look at it from the air. Look at how the vegetation cover grows a little more every millennium, and how beautiful it is now. A luxuriant, rich, and varied forest is born. It didn't all happen in a day, of course. Time played its most beautiful part, following the order of things to create perfect harmony. Initially, the vegetation took root near water sources and wetlands. At that point, plant reproduction still required very specific characteristics. Without a wetland, the conquest of plants would have been, at least at their current stage of evolution, totally impossible. We'll see why. Other plants before them, such as Cooksonia, had prepared the ground. They managed to get away with it, growing in a wide band along coastlines and waterways. Their tilling of the soil then encourages the birth of other plants, which in turn develop and spread a little further over these wetlands. It's as if a virtuous circle is taking shape before our very eyes. But terrestrial vegetation doesn't just happen. Each has its own place and its own characteristics. We can now speak of a forest for its richness and diversity. In the water, we can see plants such as calamites. At the water's edge, we can also see a sphenophyllum. A few meters from the shore, species such as chordates, seed ferns, and sigillaria complete the picture. Deeper down, arborescent species dominate the landscape. Despite the medium-sized ferns, Ceronius, and Lepidodendron can also be seen. Chordate and sigillaria are also visible further inland. This pattern may vary from region to region, but whatever the location, the forest observes a certain pre-established order in which each plant has its place. As mentioned above, the Earth's climate, and therefore biotope, is clearly demarcated by distance from the equator. The significant variation in temperature between the poles of the equator leads to a zonation of vegetation. Large coal-bearing forests of Lepidodendron, sigillaria, calamites, and chordates develop at the equator, while forests of trees, such as Glossopteris, thrive in temperate zones. It's time to go deeper into the forest to understand the different challenges of this plant cover, but also to understand how plants have managed to adapt in order to grow, develop, and diversify. Let's start by looking at how they reproduce. This analysis will give us a better understanding of how vegetation has been able to conquer larger territories. Why did most plant species end up in wetlands? There's a very good reason. Their mode of reproduction required it. Initially, species develop in patches. This is explained by a mode of reproduction based on cell cloning. This development is typical of organisms whose capacity to exploit the environment is limited, as they do not yet have any real roots other than for light capture. In other words, cloning was the only way for them to reproduce quickly and efficiently, given the conditions available to them. But this mode of reproduction also has its limits. If it's useful on poor, hard soil, it's less so for conquering a larger territory. Then spores made their grand entrance. From then on, reproduction became easier, but certain elements had to be present for it to work. A mild climate is not enough. Humidity is necessary for germination. Spores are released by the plant, then germinate to form male or female plantlets, known as gametophytes. It is these gametophytes that produce the sex cells. To make a new plant, the gametophytes must come together so that their sex cells can meet. And in the vast majority of cases, water serves as the conduit for this rapprochement. Lepidodendrons, Sigillaria, calamites, and Pecopterus use this reproductive model to extend their territory. So, to go where the water isn't, we need to take another look at our mode of reproduction and be inventive. A mode in which the germination cell is protected. A mode where sex cells can meet without the intervention of water. This is precisely when the seed appears. The seed results from the fertilization of a female sex cell by a male sex cell. A fruit then hatches, housing the seeds. These contain all the plant's genetics. The pteridospermales take advantage of this new way of developing the species. They are seed ferns. This is also the case with the Cordiatalis. They had both male and female branches. The ovules, aided by the wind, could then receive the pollen grains and form a fruit in which the seeds nestled. These seeds can even lie dormant, waiting for the right moment to begin the germination process. A major advantage for reproduction in unfavorable climatic conditions. This is how new plants were able to conquer the Earth's soil, and how vast forests came into being. Some of these forests are known as coal forests. Even so, most of them were made up of spore-bearing plants, as the humid environment lent itself to this. These included Lepidodendrons, Sigillaria, calamites, and even tree ferns. But there were also some seed-bearing plants, like the Cordiatales we've just seen, the first conifers, if you will, and seed-bearing ferns called pteridospermales. Now let's see why we speak of coal forests. How is coal formed? The production process is highly specific. The Carboniferous was the geological period when production was most intense. It was one of the events that marked this period and earned it its name. Since then, no production has been equaled in terms of intensity. For this coal to form, 3 elements are required. A dense forest, of course, but not just anywhere. It has to be close to the mountains and its feet in the water, in the heart of a marshy area. It's when all these elements come together, and only when they come together, that a particular phenomenon is triggered. When a lush, dense forest forms in a wetland between mountains, there comes a time when the ground sinks. The forest is drowned, so to speak. It gradually dies. Plant debris begins to accumulate slowly, but it doesn't decompose. Putrefaction is only possible if the fungi that cause it are present. According to scientists, this is not yet the case at this stage of life on Earth. You're probably wondering why I insisted on the presence of mountains. I'm getting to that. Sediment from the erosion of nearby mountains covers this plant debris. Depending on the region and the very makeup of the mountain range, the type of sediment may be different. In the case of clay, shale is formed. If it's sand, then sandstone will form later. The subsided and flooded area is then filled with these materials. A new cycle can begin. A new forest is formed. When it reaches its peak, the ground subsides. The forest is drowned and dies. Sediments cover the flooded area and the plant debris. They fossilize and charcoal forms. Then a new forest springs up, and so on. Each destroyed forest becomes a new coal seam. In some coal mining areas, there are hundreds of layers of fossilized forest. But this doesn't mean that the cycle is a quick one, taking just a handful of years. Coal is transformed very slowly. It takes millions of years to produce coal, and it takes on different forms, or rather, a different constitution, as it transforms before it can be called hard coal. We generally speak of coals and coal-bearing forests when referring to coal production. But this is misleading. Coal is a generic term, and hard coal is just one specific quality of coal. To better understand, let's look at the production of this phenomenon. The decomposition of plants in a low-oxygen, fungus-free environment during the Carboniferous period first takes the form of peat. Peat is the incomplete decomposition of plants in a water-saturated zone. In other words, it is a fossil organic material. It contains relatively little carbon, around 60%. After a few million years, peat becomes lignite. This is the first stage of fossil plant coal. It is brown and compact. It's the first stage of coal, but also the least qualitative, at least in terms of combustible energy. As coal transforms, its carbon content increases. Next comes hard coal, a fossilized vegetable coal with an even higher carbon content than lignite. It is also black in color, but brighter. After hard coal comes anthracite. This time the carbon content approaches 94%. It is so concentrated that it is difficult to ignite. The final stage is graphite. This is pure crystallized carbon. It is no longer flammable. So man is looking for the best quality coal with a sufficiently high carbon content, but still easily flammable, to make a perfect fuel. Hard coal is the preferred fuel, and it's this interest in man that has made him the talk of the town. But before man came along and sought to harness this combustible energy, the Carboniferous coal-making process had an impact on the climate. The burial of so much organic carbon caused a dizzying drop in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This drop in CO2 not only cools the climate, but also increases oxygen levels. Oxygen levels will have an impact on the development of insects, but we'll come back to that later. The erosion of high mountains increases. They are subject to heavy rainfall due to their geographical position, and they too draw in carbon dioxide. The combination of these phenomena, leading to a sharp drop in carbon dioxide, is conducive to the formation of an ice cap. Remember, we touched on this subject when we talked about the changing climate during the Carboniferous period. This ice cap formed mainly in southern Gondwana around 330 million years ago. This was the start of the Gondwanic glaciation, which continued through the Permian. You'll understand better now why we talk about coal forests, but also why they played a role in the cooling of certain areas of the planet. Now it's time to understand another tree-related phenomenon. We mentioned seeds earlier, but that's not the only revolution in trees. Let's see how deciduous leaves came about. The opulence of the vegetation colonizing the continent has the main effect of considerably lowering CO2 levels in the air, and by the same token, the planet's overall temperature. We've seen this regularly on our various time travels. An ecosystem is based on a delicate balance between a biotope, fauna, flora, climate, and environment. All these elements are interconnected, and each is ultimately dependent on the others. A change in temperature inevitably has an impact on all these elements, flora and fauna included. Such a major change can make some species more vulnerable, but it can also have a number of positive consequences. In temperate zones, for example, temperature differences will favor the development of deciduous trees. Trees need to adopt new aptitudes to continue colonizing the soil. They need to make better use of the sun's energy, save energy to survive temperature variations, and develop a more durable means of reproduction. Deciduous leaves thus make their grand entrance among arborescent plants, while the great coal forests stretch all the way to the equator. Leaves are not only less necessary for trees, they can also endanger them. Large quantities of water evaporate through the leaves every day. In temperate zones, certain climatic changes could lead to the loss of the tree. The trunk and branches are insulated by the bark, and the roots buried in the ground are sufficiently armed against this drop in temperature. But the leaves? They're on the front line and very greedy for water. To resist, the tree learns to get rid of the superfluous. Not only deciduous leaves, but also different modes of reproduction allow trees to grow widely across the continent. The newly formed forests were home to a wide variety of fauna. The first amniotes, or reptiles, animals such as Echinopeton, Archosaurs, or Hylonomus lyelli, live in the forest, but they share it with insects. Contrary to popular belief, these animals are not always the predators. In fact, they sometimes side with the giant insect's prey. As the forest grows and becomes so luxuriant and varied, insects benefit greatly from this new ecosystem. One of the great characteristics of the Carboniferous period was its giant insects. It's true that for our current way of thinking, to imagine for a single second that a millipede or dragonfly is close to a meter long seems totally implausible and even downright frightening. We're used to dealing with insects that are much smaller, sometimes even tiny or microscopic. Yet the Carboniferous is renowned for being the reign of giant insects. However, here again it's important to keep things in perspective if we want to get as close to reality as possible. While it's true that some Carboniferous insects were monstrously large, not all of them were. It's not a generality, an absolute rule among insects of this period. Many of them were just as small as we might imagine today. With that out of the way, let's dig a little deeper to understand the reasons for the unusual proportions of this particular animal group. Many scientists have tried to understand the causes of gigantism in these species. Why did they adopt such proportions? Several hypotheses have been put forward on the subject, but most of them are based on the significant increase in oxygen levels in the atmosphere. We have seen that the fall of the coal forests and the formation of coal led to a drop in carbon dioxide, but also to a sharp rise in oxygen levels. Michael S. Engel, a paleoentomologist specializing in insects at the University of Kansas, explains that insects don't have lungs, but rather small external orifices. These orifices, called stigmas, allow air to enter their bodies. It circulates through a network of tubes, the tracheae, to supply the organs with oxygen. This form of passive respiration is not very efficient, as oxygen diffusion is slower than if it were carried by the blood, as in vertebrates. The only way for giant arthropods to have enough oxygen to survive with such a respiratory system is for the air reaching their tracheae to be more oxygenated. This was the case in the Carboniferous, when the rate was 35% instead of 21% today. Insects trapped in amber are one of the means by which scientists have been able to determine this oxygen content. A number of experiments have been carried out to test this line of thought. Researchers led by Arizona State University paleobiologist John Vandenbrooks have grown very large dragonflies, rearing the insects from start to finish in environments similar to Earth's oxygen conditions millions of years ago. They turned out to be 15% larger than normal. To correlate these results, they also collected 11 other living fossils, such as beetles and cockroaches, in 3 habitats with different oxygen concentrations. Some had 31%, as in the Carboniferous, others 21%, as today, and still others 12%, as 240 million years ago. They discovered that dragonflies and beetles grew faster and larger in an oxygen-rich environment, while cockroaches grew more slowly and remained the same size. They also observed that all but 2 species of bugs became smaller than normal at lower oxygen concentrations. This probably explains why not all the insects were oversized at the time. With their respiratory systems, they adapt to the amount of oxygen they can take in. Coming back to insects in general, whether gigantic or ordinary sized, it's hard to say today how many different species populated the Earth. Indeed, we have no precise idea of the current number. To date, around 1 million different species have been described, but it is estimated that there are probably 10 to 100 times that number, many of them found in the canopies of the great tropical forests, notably the Amazon rainforest. So there's still a lot we don't know, even today. In the Carboniferous, we know of certain species, but there is certainly a great deal that is unknown even then. Let's take a look at some of these giants. To inaugurate our encounter with Carboniferous insects, let's start with one of the most emblematic of the era, Meganeura moniae. This is the most famous giant dragonfly of the period. With a wingspan of over 70 centimeters or 28 inches, it weighed 150 grams. In other words, such an insect on your forearm would have the same wingspan as a hawk. Its abdomen, as you can see, is very elongated. It also has 4 large ribbed wings attached to its thorax. Its 6 jointed legs are covered with spines, no doubt to help it hang on to its victims. Dragonflies are predators, and this one is a fearsomely efficient one. Its eyesight is a major asset. It has a 360-degree view. Nothing escapes it. But it's not enough to have a good view of your victim. You also need to be reactive and powerful in order to seize it and give it no chance of regaining its freedom. Reactivity is provided by its wings and legs. Unlike our modern dragonflies, which do this while hovering, this one was able to attack in flight. Scientists have studied the fossil and hypothesized that it could reach a top speed of 70 kilometers per hour or 44 miles per hour. The power, however, lies in the head. Its mouth parts are designed for biting. She was never a picky eater, making do with whatever came her way. Cockroaches, bedbugs, cicadas, beetles, mosquitoes, wasps, termites, ants. Its diet was as varied as insect biodiversity could be in these lush Carboniferous forests. Here's a 20-centimeter or 8-inch cockroach that should make a perfect breakfast for our majestic Meganeura. In the same vein, but smaller, with a wingspan of 55 centimeters or 22 inches, we can also mention the Mesozoic, Heliodictyopteran. This one has 3 pairs of wings. Another animal, this time wingless, is as iconic of the period as Meganeura. It's a centipede, Arthropods. 450 million years ago, centipedes, i.e. myriapods, a sub-branch of the arthropods and cousin of insects, began to emerge from the water. They were probably the first animals to settle permanently on continents, but they were probably not at first as impressive as the one that now awaits us. Over 2.5 meters, or 8 feet long, and around 50 centimeters, or 20 inches wide. And that's just the beginning. This centipede was as long as an alligator. Arthropods' diet still poses questions for the scientific community. Traces of pollen were found in its abdomen, suggesting an herbivorous diet. But it also had 2 pincers and a very powerful jaw. Such tools suggest a carnivorous diet. Let's take a look at Megarachne, a spider. At least aesthetically it looks like one, even if recent studies have shown that scientists classify the animal as a eurypterid. This misclassification was based on certain characteristics, such as the shape of its carapace, the arrangement of its mouth parts, its circular belly, and its 15-millimeter circular eyes, located between the other 2 eyes in the middle of its head. At first glance, this suggested that Megarachne was a spider, and not just any spider, the largest ever to have lived on Earth. Since then, the tools and techniques used to study fossils, as well as our knowledge of the past, have enabled us to analyze these animals from a different, more precise angle. Although this is certainly a eurypterid, its deceptive appearance has earned it the right to appear here, simply for the pleasure and fright that such an animal provides. With a length of 35 centimeters or 14 inches and a distance of 60 centimeters or 24 inches between the upper legs, it is without doubt the most impressive of all arachnids. With such proportions, it could cover a cat. In addition to its size, its predatory prowess is nothing to be ashamed of. She's perfectly equipped for the hunt, and will stop at nothing when the opportunity presents itself. The only relief is that Megarachne is no longer with us. Crossing paths with this type of animal is enough to make your hair stand on end and make you scream in horror. Let's end our tour of Carboniferous arthropods and insects on a softer note, with the discovery in 2021 of Tenoptilus frequens. The Paris Natural History Museum has funded and coordinated a paleology research group. It was this study that brought Tenoptilus frequens to light. It has an abdominal appendage for depositing eggs. These animals are known as ovipositors. They also have 3 pairs of sword-shaped valves and 2 valve articulation systems. In other words, they have all the characteristics of Orthoptera. Analyses have enabled us to study the fossilized animal's abdomen in greater depth. We're talking here about a lobetid insect, i.e. of the locust, grasshopper, or cricket genus. These animals were already living on Earth in the Carboniferous period. The major difference between today's insect population and that of the past lies in the insect's growth phase. Back then, very few were part of the so-called metamorphosis insects, such as flies, bees, and beetles. Vegetation is one of the keys to this animal diversification. Alongside the classic ferns with sporangia-bearing leaves, there are ferns whose leaves bear seeds for the very first time. After the appearance of amniotic eggs, the seed enters the scene. So it seems that plants, too, are undergoing major revolutions. Numerous species, insects, but also synapsids, diapsids, and amphibians are taking advantage of this new, flourishing ecosystem and all the riches it has to offer. The expansion of all these species should not, however, obscure the change that is taking place in the forest at the end of the Carboniferous period. Indeed, with the end of coal formation comes the end of the Carboniferous, from which the period takes its name. One possible explanation for the end of charcoal production lies in the appearance of a new species of lignivorous or xylophagous fungi, capable of degrading all lignin thanks to enzymes known as lignin peroxidases. Their appearance ushered in a new era, the Permian. It too will have to meet certain challenges, but we'll see about that on our next trip. Carboniferous plants were largely spore plants. In other words, they needed water to develop and maximize their chances of reproduction. A few seed plants have begun to appear, but their presence is still timid on the continent. Most of them reproduce by sporangia. This is the case of Sigillaria and Lepidodendron, which were very common during the Carboniferous system. As we have seen, swamps are drying up in some regions. The land is gradually becoming an oven. If the soil gets drier and drier, water can no longer serve as a channel for spore-forming plants. What's more, these plants acclimatize to a humid rather than tropical environment, rather than to arid soil and dry air, not to mention reproduction, find it increasingly difficult to find sufficient energy to grow and develop. The forest of these arborescent plants is dying a slow death. These new, extremely difficult conditions have taken their toll. They're disappearing. On the other hand, one group of plants managed to survive in this seemingly hostile environment during the Permian. These are the bare-seeded plants known as gymnosperms. Remember their timid appearance in the Carboniferous? Well, the least we can say is that in the Permian, they became much more widespread on the continent. These include, but are not limited to, the famous seed ferns. Let's take a closer look. At the end of the Carboniferous period, they gradually began to colonize the Earth's soil. This was only the beginning of their colonization, of course, as spore-bearing plants were already on conquered ground, so it was difficult for them to find a place for themselves in this dense, lush plant cover. But when drought came knocking on the door of this entirely water-dependent forest, spores were forced to give way. The conifers will take advantage of the vacant space and take over the land, but not just anywhere. As you know, the climate has undergone many changes over the course of the Earth's history. Depending on where you are on the globe, you won't find the same temperatures. On either side of the mountains, you can find rather humid zones or arid lands. There are also more temperate zones with clearly defined seasons. The conifer family will not develop in the same way everywhere, depending on the region. The Walchia conifer, for example, establishes itself in the north. Walchia piniformis is a conifer somewhere between Cyprus and Araucaria, a large conifer in the Andes. The cone-shaped fruits are the source of this family's distinctive name. To the south, we find the Glossopteridales. These trees can reach 30 meters or 100 feet in height. The wood of their trunks and branches has rings, similar to those of some of our contemporary species. These rings are invaluable witnesses, as they enable scientists to confirm one thing. In these temperate zones, the climate has clear-cut seasons. To adapt to these sometimes extreme changes, these trees have adopted a new strategy: deciduous leaves. At the same time, cycads also appeared. They are considered to be close to conifers despite their deceptive appearance as a cross between a fern and a palm. The reason they are so close to conifers is that they too contain the various reproductive organs which are located at the heart of the leaf crown in the form of a modified leaf cone known as a strobile. The cycadophytes follicularis and cycadophytes granulatus found here are only just beginning to colonize the soil. In the Mesozoic, the cycadales group expanded. This great diversification of trees and zonation of plants enabled new ecological niches to emerge. New evolutionary radiations are underway. As we saw at the end of the Carboniferous period, amphibians gave rise to amniotes, animals capable of laying eggs with shells. Without this ability, these amphibians were completely dependent on the aquatic environment. Indeed, amphibians had legs to move around and lungs to breathe. All they lacked was the assurance of being able to protect their offspring on land. Until now, amphibians had to lay their eggs in water. To free themselves completely from this element, they had to update their mode of reproduction. The amniote class has the ability to lay eggs with a shell and amniotic fluid inside. The amniotic egg enables embryos to develop serenely on the Earth's surface. It can withstand air pressure and any microshocks on Earth. But evolution didn't stop there. These amniotes were to define the major evolutionary lines of the Permian. They defined the new face of fauna in the era that closed the Paleozoic. They gave rise to new clades, the sauropsids and synapsids. We'll come back to the latter in a moment. These two branches are undoubtedly descended from two species that we had the opportunity to crossbreed during the Carboniferous. At the very end of the Carboniferous, to be precise. For the sauropsid branch, it's Hylonomus laeli. For the synapsid branch, it's Archaeopteryx florensis. Between them, they gave rise to many of the terrestrial species that populated the continent in the Permian. Over the millions of years of the late Carboniferous and the three periods that define the Permian, species evolved and diversified. The path of this evolution and what it will lead to is very interesting to observe. Before discussing the emergence of synapsids and sauropsids, it's important to understand and differentiate certain technical terms that define their characteristics. Those of particular interest to us are those used to classify amniote skulls according to the number and position of temporal windows: anapsid, synapsid, euryapsid, and diapsid. When several species are subjected to the same environmental constraints and ecological niches, they will independently adopt several similar physiological, morphological, and sometimes even behavioral traits. This is known as convergent evolution. The different temporal windows mentioned earlier are part of this type of evolutionary convergence. Depending on their environment, but also their ecological niche and therefore their diet, each of these species has evolved according to its own needs. The temporal window houses the temporal masticatory muscles. The strength and position of these muscles respond to a particular need, depending on the diet and type of prey, for example. The contribution made by the different bones to the edges of these temporal windows varies from group to group. When we speak of anapsids or parareptiles, as the term anapsid is controversial among some scientists, we are referring to a group of amniotes that have no temporal fossa. Synapsids are reptiles with skulls pierced by a single, lower temporal window. Finally, diapsids have two. The diapsid skull is characterized by the presence of upper and lower temporal fossae. According to recent research, these same diapsids, despite their two pits, may have become euryapsids or anapsids. Both may have lost one of the pits during their evolution. The term euryapsid is also controversial, as its meaning is ambiguous. It can refer to all amniotes with an upper temporal window, or only to direct descendants of the first diapsids. The euryapsid form corresponds to the presence of upper temporal fossae only. Now that the shape of their skulls holds no secrets for you, let's take a closer look at their morphology, ecological niche, and various characteristics. Pelycosaurs are many and varied. They come in all shapes and sizes. Pelycosaurs include several families, such as Cassidae, Varanopatae, Ophiocodontidae, Edaphosauridae, Eotherididae, and Sphenacodontidae. What do they have in common? They all belong to the mammalian branch. We call them mammalian reptiles, although today we prefer the term pre-mammalian. Among them is the famous Dimetrodon, Sphenacodontidae. So here we are with our very first synapsid. It's quite something. Perhaps given its morphology and appearance, you're thinking that we forgot to specify one thing, the emergence of the first dinosaurs. But no, we haven't forgotten anything. Dimetrodon isn't a dinosaur. It's a reptile. The big difference between the two is that all dinosaurs, or sauropsids, have two pairs of temporal fossae, whereas Dimetrodon has only one. Dinosaurs will appear 40 million years later, so we'll have to be patient. Dimetrodon is therefore a synapsid, not a sauropsid. It's also a quadruped with a very special feature, its dorsal sail. It's impossible to confuse or miss it in the middle of this sparse wetland plain with such a fan on its back. The usefulness of this sail is still a matter of debate. Many scientists have studied the subject and are still trying to unravel the mystery of this singular physical attraction. It may be that the sail plays a thermoregulatory role, evacuating heat or, on the contrary, capturing it to warm the rest of the body. Others, however, suggest that it's more a means of courtship to seduce the opposite sex. Unless, according to the latter, it's simply a useful means of stabilizing the skeleton, and in particular the spine. Let's take a look at the rest of his skeleton and morphology. Its skull is high and curved, with large teeth of varying sizes set along the length of the jaws. There's no doubt about its diet. It's a perfect carnivore. Its favorite prey is fish, but it's not averse to a small tetrapod, a reptile, or even an amphibian. It shares its ecosystem with animals such as Archaea, Diplacalus, Eriops, Captorhinus, and Edaphosaurus. Dimetrodon is a synapsid belonging to the sphenacodont clade. Not all sphenacodonts have a veil like Dimetrodon. Haptodus, for example, also belongs to the sphenacodont clade. It looks more like a huge chameleon. Also a quadruped, its tail is as long as its body. Now here is an Edaphosaurus from the Edaphosauridae family. This time we're dealing with a herbivore. We should even call it a vegetavore to avoid any confusion. We often speak of herbivores as opposed to meat eaters, but herbivore means eating grass. Grass was not present in the Permian. There is a multitude of plants, of course, as we have seen and will soon see again on this trip. And vegetation has greatly developed and even evolved. But for the moment, it's still just plants of various shapes and sizes, not grass as such. Our Edaphosaurus, then, is a vegetarian, feeding on the plants it finds along the way. It is one of the oldest known herbivorous tetrapods. It measures between 1 meter or 3 feet and 3 meters or 7 feet, and weighs around 300 kilograms or 660 pounds. You'll notice that it too has a lovely dorsal sail. We could go on with our synapsid investigations and describe a few other species, but the most important thing to remember about this group is its evolution. The synapsids will give rise to the Therapsid branch. In a few minutes you'll understand the importance of this group. In addition to the large Pelycosaur family, the synapsids gave rise to the Therapsid family. These rapidly evolved and diversified. Just a few million years after the appearance of the first Therapsids, a new branch of vertebrates was born. Let's take a look at these morphological evolutions by studying different species of Permian Therapsids. The first Therapsid I'd like to introduce you to belongs to the order Dinocephales. It's even a suborder of Tepinocephalus. This is Moschops. Yes, it's rather huge. It's almost 3 meters or 10 feet long and must weigh close to a ton. This semi-aquatic giant is an imposing plant eater. Knowing that plants don't provide much in the way of calories and energy, and given its huge dimensions, we estimate that it would need to eat over 100 kilograms or 220 pounds of leaves a day to meet its needs. As I was saying, it's semi-aquatic. By this I mean that Moschops lives a bit like our modern-day hippopotamuses. He is able to go on the ground but thrives in bodies of water. If its size is relatively exceptional, it's above all its gait that I'd like to highlight here. Until now, amphibians and parareptiles had a very arched, crawling gait, like many of today's reptiles. Here we're closer to a mammalian gait. The elbow joint, for example, offers a wider opening. The gait is therefore quite different. Another Therapsid, much smaller but just as interesting to observe, is Lycanops. It measures around 1 meter and probably weighs no more than 50 kilograms or 33 pounds, but this doesn't stop it from being a very good hunter. He hunts prey within his reach, of modest size, such as a few Sauropsids that we'll no doubt meet a little later, but also some members of his clade, small Therapsids, notably Diconodonts. Lycanops is an agile predator. Once again, I'd like to take a close look at its mode of movement. Like moss chops, it is far from having an arched, crawling gait typical of all the quadruped vertebrates we had encountered before them. In fact, it's quicker in its movements than anything we've seen before. Thanks to its long, close-to-the-body legs, it is more stable, and its movements seem easier, like quadruped mammals. Its mouth is a formidable weapon. It has a long, slender head, like the Canidae genus. But above all, it has fang-like teeth on both the upper and lower jaws. They act like daggers, they kill and tear. The flesh of this prey won't resist such perfectly sharp blades for long. In its mouth, it's probably a Robertia. It had the misfortune to fall under the fangs of the Lycanops. It does, however, provide an opportunity to evoke a new family of Therapsids. Robertia is a Therapsid that belongs to the Diconodont family. In fact, it was one of the very first of its kind in the Middle Permian. It is a sort of primitive Diconodont in the sense that it is one of the oldest in the branch. This little plant eater didn't stand a chance against Lycanops. The small canine teeth protruding from its upper jaw are only useful for cutting through the toughest stems. Once free, it can sever the stem with its horny beak and enjoy a well-deserved meal. Another member of the Diconodont group we'll be looking at now is more imposing, measuring over 1.20 meters or 4 feet on average. Also a vegetarian, it is not immune to carnivores despite its more respectable size. Predators are numerous here, powerful and ferocious. Diconodon has to be on his guard. As it cuts vegetation with its beak or uproots tubers and roots with its tusks, danger lurks. Before closing this part on the Therapsids, I'd like to turn to the Upper Permian with another family, the Cynodonts. Procynosuchus is a semi-aquatic cynodont, as was Moschops. Measuring around 60 centimeters or 25 inches long, it appears to have the body of a crocodile and the head of a dog. It has a long tail, flat feet, and a long rounded head. In the water, it is perfectly at ease. Like an eel, it wriggles to swim. Its tail acts as a propeller in the water and is a great asset for gaining speed. But it's not all about the tail. Its legs are also very efficient in their own way. Its flat feet become paddles, and thanks to flexor muscles that can be identified by the ridges on the femur, it can bend and unfold its legs to increase thrust through the water. So that's all we can say about the Therapsids. By now, you're probably wondering what's so important about Therapsids. Well, when we introduced this group, I mentioned that this lineage was very important for the further evolution of living organisms. We didn't quite get to the bottom of it, but I did drop a few hints to put you on the right track, especially when we looked at the gait of certain animals, for example. Do you remember Lycanops? The movement was no longer reptilian, but tended more towards that of mammals. Have you guessed the key evolutionary step that led to Therapsids? Therapsids give rise to a new branch, the mammals. These, in turn, gave rise to the mammals, a group that today occupies an important place on our planet. But it all began here in the Permian with the Therapsids. In this second part on Therapsids, rather than approaching these animals by family, we're going to discover them by period. In this way, you'll be able to see that in the lineage of the Therapsids, the rapid evolution of these animals enabled the first morphological characteristics of mammals to be outlined in just a few thousand years. As its name suggests, Sphenacodon is a member of the Sphenacodontidae family, just like Dimetrodon or Haptidus, which introduced our synapsid group. We're in the lower Permian here. We're a long way from the characteristics you'd expect from a mammal. It adopts a much more reptilian morphology. It resembles a lizard, or more broadly, a reptile. It appeared in the upper Carboniferous and was still present in the lower Permian. At 3 meters long, it had very sharp teeth and was therefore a carnivore. Let's move on to the middle Permian. Let's start with Biarmosokia. The silhouette and head shape are already less reptilian. The head is smaller than that of the Sphenacodontidae presented earlier. However, the temporal cleft is larger than in the latter. Also noticeable is the greater flare at the back of the skull, where the muscles are attached. This means that the muscles are larger, resulting in a stronger bite. It is also equipped with enlarged canines. Canines, biting muscles, a smaller head that's better proportioned to the rest of the body. We can already see that evolution is underway, although Biarmosokia still retains some very primitive features. This is also true of the order Dinocephales. Their members include vegetarians, carnivores, and even omnivores. While some are exclusively terrestrial, others are semi-aquatic. Dinocephales have diversified greatly over the course of their presence on our planet. Although they are still very primitive, there have been some important changes. The ilium, for example, the upper part of the coxal bone, which along with the sacrum and coccyx enables movement of the pelvis, is now more elongated. Movement and gait are therefore more stable and comfortable. In carnivores, if we focus on the head, we can also see some changes, notably in the differentiation of teeth. Some at the front are longer and can shear. On the lower part, we can see that the teeth along the tongue interlock and are characterized by a crushing surface when the upper jaw meets the lower. Chewing can almost begin. Let's take a look at some therocephalons. Therocephalons are the closest relatives of the cynodonts that gave rise to mammals. A close look at the skull skeleton of one of them reveals the appearance of the secondary palate. It separates the nasal cavity from the oral cavity. This is a very common feature in mammals. Gorinicus is a therocephalus, like Gorinicus massiotinae and Gorinicus sundarensis. Depending on the species, the upper dentition consisted of 4 to 5 incisors, a large saber-toothed canine, and 3 to 4 postcanines. The articulated cervical vertebrae, the posture of the legs under the belly, and the pelvis favor a more stable upright gait. In other words, the gait is more mammal-like than reptiliform. It's already time to continue our evolutionary journey by discovering the species of the upper Permian. Here are a few members of the Gorgonospians. One of them is an Inostransevia. It's the largest. It's close to Ursid size at 4 meters or 14 feet long and around 350 kilograms or 770 pounds. Its head is about 45 centimeters or 18 inches long, which is quite reasonable and proportional to the rest of the body. Its teeth, on the other hand, are very long, about 12 centimeters or 4 inches. This admirable length, however, is not so developed for all the teeth. Only the canines are. The others are specialized like ours, each with a particular shape depending on whether they cut, shear, or crush. They are gigantic and terribly frightening. However, if we put aside their monstrous appearance, their name comes from the Gorgons, the snake-haired women of Greek mythology. Then we can glimpse new, evolutionary stages. This mammalian reptile lived in the Siberian desert during the Permian era, one of the driest periods of the Paleozoic era. It adapted to these new conditions. Its legs, feet, and ear bones bring it closer to mammals than reptiles, even though it undoubtedly belongs to this group. Let's finish with the order that gave rise to the mammaliforms and soon to be mammals, the order of cynodonts. Let's take a closer look at Thrinaxodon. The teeth have evolved considerably and are now perfectly differentiated. The cranium is also enlarged at the back of the head. The zygomatic arch in the skull has also widened, bringing it closer to that of mammals and allowing for a more robust jaw musculature. But there's another important thing to discover about Thrinaxodon: the fur. At least that's what some scientists think. Thrinaxodon was undoubtedly an endothermic species. Before moving on to the second group, the Therapsids, which are also important in today's world, let's take a look at the two characteristics of cynodonts and diconodonts that scientists have recently discovered: dentition and thermoregulation. Dicynodont means two dog teeth. This is an order of herbivores. In addition to its upper jaw tusks, the diconodont had a turtle-like beak, which it used to chew its food. The diconodont order was highly diversified, with members ranging in size from a rat to a large elephant. And speaking of elephants, many of today's animals have tusks, including elephants, walruses, and warthogs. These animals are all mammals. This was not necessarily the case at the time, however, as a new evolutionary process was clearly set in motion in these Therapsids, which would later give rise to mammals. Tusks are defined by teeth that protrude from the mouth and grow continuously, as is the case with some diconodonts. In this case, the tusks are made of dentine, but this is not the case with all diconodonts, as some have no tusks but do have teeth. These teeth also have an interesting peculiarity to note about their composition. Here, it's not dentin, but hard enamel, a material also widely found in mammals. These are very large teeth, canines made of enamel. Dating analyses were carried out on 90 fossils as part of an international collaboration. These analyses brought to light a very important fact about two groups of Therapsids, the diconodonts and the cynodonts. They were undoubtedly warm-blooded. Today, birds and mammals are the only animals capable not only of producing their own body heat, known as endothermy, but also of maintaining it at a constant high temperature, known as homeothermy. The combination of these two characteristics in mammals and birds is referred to as endohomeothermy. This invaluable characteristic, found in mammals today, is thought to have appeared in therapsids as early as the Upper Permian, between 252 and 259 million years ago. According to the study, 63 of the 90 fossils studied were therapsids of 22 different species, including diconodonts and cynodonts. The researchers analyzed what is known as the isotopic composition of oxygen. A chemical element can take on different forms, known as an isotope, with a nucleus of different mass, depending on the different isotopes. In other words, an isotope is a kind of fingerprint of a chemical element under given conditions, in this case in relation to oxygen. Stable oxygen isotopes are incorporated differently into bones and teeth, depending on the animal's metabolism. By analyzing this data, we can determine whether they are cold-blooded or warm-blooded. In this way, the group of scientists was able to determine new evolutionary perspectives in two of our therapsids, since cynodonts and diconodonts were probably warm-blooded and capable of endohomeothermy. Are the two related? It's hard to say for sure. Even so, the majority of terrestrial species will disappear as a result of the mass extinction that is fast approaching, with the exception of diconodonts and cynodonts in particular. The key to their resistance to abrupt climate change may lie precisely in their endohomeothermic capacity. These discoveries allow us to close the chapter on therapsids and the emergence of mammillomorphs. Over the course of evolution, these cynodont species gave rise to the mammaliforms, then in turn to the first mammals. So, with the origin of this group, our origins began millions of years ago in the Permian. Let's open another chapter with the sauropsids. Sauropsids are a clade of tetrapods and a sister group to the synapsids we've just seen. Together, they form the taxon amniotes. Sauropsids are divided into several branches, including anapsids, which have no temporal fossae, and diapsids, which have two. Let's start with the parareptiles. These are diapsids that may well have lost their temporal fossae. Our very first reptile is not terrestrial but aquatic. To meet him, we'll have to leave the peacefulness of the forest to reach the large lake at our feet. It's a veritable fish pond here. Countless species of fish and other freshwater animals share the territory. Despite the apparent calm and the richness of the seabed covered in seaweed and other marine vegetation, danger is ever present. As we descend a little deeper into the water, we should cross paths with our famous Mesosaurus. And here it is. With its meter-long, lanky form and long tail, it's impossible to mistake it for any other. It belongs to the anapsid reptile genus. It was one of the first reptiles to return to the water after the amphibians had left it to settle and evolve on land. Its nostrils are located on the top of its skull, enabling it to breathe with only the upper part of its head protruding, rather like our modern-day crocodiles. Its morphology suggests that it moved by undulating its body, but it was also capable of diving to the depths. Its thoracic cage is strong enough to allow this in any case. His ribs are banana-shaped and very thick. This means they can withstand the pressure of the water. This ability is very useful for feeding on the seabed. It hunted small crustaceans and other small prey, which it captured with its jaws, equipped with numerous elongated, fine, pointed teeth. Despite its great adaptation to the aquatic environment, Mesosaurus may well have had to visit land during its lifetime, but only for one very special occasion, egg laying. This would bring him closer to a way of life that we still see today in sea turtles. Like these turtles, the shape of its feet makes it very difficult to move around on land, and it is more at ease in the aquatic world. Like Perriosaurus, Mesosaurus belongs to the Diapsid clade. Although both belong to the same class, they do not share the same ecological niche. This one is a terrestrial quadruped. So let's get out of these murky waters and onto dry land. This is Perriosaurus nasicornis, one of the first of the Perriosaurus genus. It's a large animal with a skull about 50 centimeters or 20 inches long. Its snout is fitted with a solid carapace. Perriosaurus has many teeth, even on the palate. These are not useful for attacking meat, but rather plants. Its teeth are ideal for cutting hard plant fibers, as they are topped by cusps. Cusps are the sharp points at the top of the teeth's dentine. The Perriosaurus family also includes Scutasaurus. Its name means shield reptile, in reference to its bony armor and the many spikes decorating its skull. It measures around 3 meters or 10 feet. As you can see, he's big, but also very heavy and imposing. However, his skeleton is not very well adapted to walking. It moves slowly and with little ease, so it's hardly surprising that more powerful reptiles such as Enostransevia or Gorgonopsian, whose path we've already crossed, easily overcame this large Scutasaurus. Its only defense was its muscular body and strong bones. Rows of hard bony plates under his skin covered his powerful muscles. But this didn't dampen the ardor of the most reckless or the hungriest, as is clearly the case with this Enostransevia. Scutasaurus must undoubtedly have known the hunger in his belly, because in the semi-desert region where he found himself, there was very little vegetation. He must therefore travel many kilometers, often in the open, and therefore at the mercy of predators. When the precious plant treasure is finally within reach of its mouth, it uses its flattened teeth to crush the leaves and get to the bottom of the young branches. To digest, it is one of the so-called lithophagous animals. To digest plants, they ingest gastroliths, i.e. stomach stones. Stored in the gizzard or stomach, they facilitate the animal's digestion. Not all Permian sauropsids were large animals. Look at this one. We could have passed it by without even noticing its presence. So well does it blend into the background. This Procolophon is a small parareptile measuring around 30 centimeters or 12 inches and weighing just 2 kilograms or 5 pounds. It's rather stocky, as you can see, and scientists believe that its short, powerful legs helped it to dig burrows. To feed or protect itself from predators, nothing is less certain. It has several characteristics that tend to place it in all possible categories: vegetarian, insectivorous, and perhaps simply omnivorous. While this one is quietly enjoying his meal, we'll be taking a look at another group of sauropsids. The skulls of these amniotes have two temporal fossae, so we're talking about diapsid types. In sauropsids, as in synapsids, a new branch appears. A branch that little by little will also lead us to contemporary animals. The diapsid branch will in fact lead to several distinct evolutions. Ongoing studies and research sometimes contradict previous results, meaning that the classification of these animals is still a matter of debate. The diversification and evolutionary process is so broad that it's not always easy to make sense of it all. Let's take a look at the findings of some researchers and paleobiologists. The sauropsids are the origin of several lineages, or branches, which we're going to study in a little more depth. The testudines, diapsids, and archosauromorphs have many secrets to reveal about the evolution of living things. Let's start with testudines. It's through their study that scientists have been able to understand one of the evolutionary stages of diapsids. To understand the lineage of turtles, and therefore of testudines, we need to go back to the probable origins of this group, and that leads us to Unatosaurus. Unatosaurus africanus is a kind of prototorture. Its classification is still a matter of debate, with some scientists thinking that it too could be part of the large Periosaur family we saw a few minutes ago. Recent research, however, tends to refute this hypothesis, to which we'll return after a brief presentation of Unatosaurus. Many physical characteristics suggest that Unatosaurus was at the origin of the turtle branch. His silhouette and morphology suggest it, but it's his skeleton that will help to support this hypothesis. It has broad, elongated ribs that curve around its back and belly. It has 9 elongated trunk vertebrae, 9 pairs of broad T-shaped dorsal ribs, and 5 pairs of gastralia, bony dermal plates also known as ventral plastrons. With such a skeleton, it's easy to guess a form of protoclea that would later become a carapace. Unatosaurus was a burrowing animal. The evolution of its skeleton may well have been a response to its burrowing needs. To facilitate burrowing, the ribs widened and flattened. But protection from predators can't be ruled out either. Indeed, today's turtles have preserved and even improved this physical aptitude, whether or not they are burrowers. The prospect that it could also be a weapon of defense against predators is therefore entirely plausible. Swallowing a round animal with such a carapace is very difficult. Let's see what scientists have discovered about Unatosaurus. A team of researchers from Yale University in the USA have uncovered an interesting point about the evolution of these animals. In juvenile Unatosaurus, they have identified small openings characteristic of diapsid reptiles. In other words, 2 temporal fossae. Later, however, they closed. Unatosaurus became an anapsid. This means that anapsid testudines may have evolved from diapsid reptiles during the Permian period. If this is the case, then we can rule out the proposed origin of Periosaurus mentioned earlier. While turtles, the order of testudines, were previously considered to belong to the subclass Anaspidae, today some believe that testudines are diapsids that have lost their temporal fossae. For the moment, the question is still being debated by scientists, but these results favor the hypothesis that diapsids gave rise to anapsids. Speaking of diapsids, it's about time we met a few of them, don't you think? Diapsids are a sub-branch of sauropsids. While anapsids have no temporal fossae, diapsids have two. Diapsids have a plurality of environments and niches. While many of the previous sauropsids live on land, the next one prefers large expanses of fresh water. Hovasaurus is much smaller than our earlier Mesosaurus, but he has much to teach us. He is just 50 centimeters or 20 inches long. Its tail alone accounts for half its total length. Its tail is flattened on both sides, probably enabling it to swim by undulating its body. The lateral undulations of the tail could in fact provide sufficient propulsive thrust to move the whole body. In a way, it resembles a lanky marine iguana. Surprisingly, paleontologists have also found stones in its stomach. This is quite common in vegetarians to aid digestion. But Hovasaurus is not a herbivore. It is a piscivorous fish eater. Stones like these therefore raise further questions. It may well be that despite this diet, Hovasaurus used gastroliths to aid digestion. But for some scientists, another answer is possible. They were useful for diving. He would swallow these stones to dive faster when hunting. Gastroliths are found near the abdominal cavity, a soft tissue membrane specially designed to contain them. Given the location of these stones, this means that Hovasaurus's center of gravity is at the rear. In these circumstances, a rearward placed center of gravity would undoubtedly have increased forward thrust through the sinuous movement of the tail, enabling it to dive more easily. Hovasaurus was therefore an animal that could reach a certain depth. The way it swam and its diet are among the clues that enable researchers to advance this hypothesis. But they are not the only ones. Another fact also supports this hypothesis. This time it's its skeleton. The study of fossils reveals pachyostosis in this animal. This is a bone specialization often found in amniotes secondarily adapted to aquatic environments. The bones undergo a thickening, generally caused by additional layers of lamellar bone, which increases the animal's weight, like a kind of ballast. This increases speed and depth, as well as swimming ability. This diapsid, therefore, develops more and more skills to adapt to new living conditions. Let's continue our investigations with another family. If there's one diapsid family not to be missed, it's the archosauromorph family. As we've seen, sauropsids gave rise to diapsids. The latter have left their mark on Earth's history, and some of their descendants are still part of our lives today. In fact, among these diapsids, we see the appearance of those grouped together in the Permian under the name of archosauromorphs. They form one of the keys to the evolution of contemporary species. After the archosauromorphs came the archosauriforms and archosaurians, from which came dinosaurs, flying reptiles, and even birds. Once again, many of our contemporary species originated here in the Permian. Let's hear what these archosauromorphs have to say. Protorosaurus is the oldest of its kind known to scientists. he's a bit special, I must admit. This insectivore does indeed resemble a lizard, but with long legs and a disproportionately long neck. This morphology, surprising as it is, seems to be more of an asset than anything else. Given its musculature and legs, it's safe to assume that we're dealing here with a fast-moving reptile. Towards the end of the Permian, these archosauromorphs gave rise to the archosauriforms. This category includes Proterosuchus fergusi. It was a predator and undoubtedly one of the largest terrestrial reptiles of its time. It measures almost 3 meters or 10 feet. Its long legs are perfectly designed for running. When it's chasing prey, it looks even more formidable. This herd of Lystrosaurus gently crossing the stream should be on its guard. This small herbivore is a burrowing animal of the order Synapsidae. It is a diconodont. Its stocky body, sturdy limbs, and famous pair of tusks on its upper jaw will be far from enough to cope with the mighty Proterosuchus lying in ambush. It feeds on fish, reptiles, and other animals of varying size that come to drink at the waterhole. He occupies this watering hole patiently, waiting for an opportunity to present itself. Like the crocodile, ambush defines its hunting strategy. Proterosuchus shares other characteristics with the crocodile, although there are also many differences. Like crocodiles, Proterosuchus has powerful jaws with conical teeth. Neck muscles complement its armada of sharp teeth, enabling it to open and close its mouth very quickly. He is impressive, even from a distance. It also has short muscular legs, but unlike crocodiles, they offer greater ease on the ground. So perhaps to a lesser extent, it also hunted on the ground. What crocodiles don't have either, unlike our Proterosuchus, is a hook-shaped, downward-pointing premaxilla on its upper jaw, which is very useful for slippery prey. It also has a few trump cards to play if it and its descendants, or at least the various evolutions that will follow, are to survive. It is able to cope with extreme situations. For example, some researchers believe that it stores fat in its tail and can go for months without eating. When prey is in short supply, it can hold out for long periods. It is also able to regulate its body temperature by alternating between sunbathing and bathing in cool water. Here again, given that the Permian continents were in a completely different position, with its habitat closer to the South Pole, it was able to acclimatize more easily to the changing seasons. Our archosauriform thus opened the door to future archosaurians and later dinosaurs, crocodiles, and birds. While future archosaurians prepare to make their grand entrance on the scene, other reptiles have also adopted interesting new abilities. Before parading through the air, reptiles have gone through several intermediate phases. Predators on the ground are increasingly ferocious and cut out to attack any species. Pelycosaurs, for example, are widely present on the continent. Smaller reptiles don't stand a chance, unless they manage to conquer another environment. And that's exactly what some will do. A new environment is the only solution. So they've become arboreal. They live in trees, particularly in the canopy. This zone is richer in light, but also in insects of all kinds. In other words, there's an abundance of food to feed these new arrivals. Meet Coelurosaurus. It has an elongated, flattened body. It measures around 40 centimeters or 16 inches and blends easily into this landscape in the heart of the canopy. Coelurosaurus's special feature is, of course, the membrane on its sides that enables it to glide. These membranes are not wings per se. They are supported by bony rays of dermal origin and involve neither ribs nor limbs. When it spreads and stretches its upper limbs, this action stretches the membranes that enable it to glide. According to paleobiologists, its ancestor must have jumped from branch to branch to move from one tree to another. In this way, he avoided taking too many risks on the ground. Evolution would later give him the ability to glide between two trees, gaining in agility. It doesn't fly yet. Coelurosaurus only glides, but it opens up new perspectives, those of the conquest of the sky by reptiles. Despite all these radiations and great biological revolutions, the Permian also marks the end of an era, that of the Paleozoic. A mass extinction is underway and will once again upset the order of living things. Many Permian animals will not reach the next era, the Triassic. A new system, the Mesozoic, begins. Before entering this new period, the world will face a major fracture, one that will leave its mark on the Permian and Triassic eras. Pangea will break up again. Yes, it's not the first time that the Earth's internal activity has beaten time and played its most beautiful symphony, the waltz of the continents. This waltz continues, but this time it's no longer about unification, but separation. The North Atlantic Ocean will open up, causing the continent to break up. This fracturing of the land will lead to major changes to which not all species will be able to adapt. Several factors combined over several million years will lead to the disappearance of almost 90% of marine and terrestrial species. It's a chain reaction that will undermine the very cycle of life itself. The food chain breaks down, a domino effect that will impact every member of this chain, notably 75% of terrestrial vertebrates, but also the majority of marine animals. Water contains methane hydrate, also known as clathrate. Until now, it has been in solid form. Pressure and low temperatures have enabled methane hydrate to maintain this state. As the temperature rises, it becomes gaseous, releasing the methane. If carbon dioxide is a powerful greenhouse gas, methane is even more dangerous, because it is even more powerful than CO2. It heats up the water. The ocean gains 10 degrees. This is enormous. The marine breeding ground is transformed into a veritable aquatic hell. The heat also has an effect on the oxygen present in the water. If a few animals had managed to cope with the new temperatures, the lack of oxygen, the anoxia, finishes them off, leaving them no chance of survival. 96% of marine species disappear. Some seabeds are weakened by plate movements, but also by areas where the Earth's mantle has not regenerated sufficiently. The ground is so fragile in places that it causes the ocean floor to collapse in on itself. The sea level will then drop by 250 meters or 820 feet. Where the sea once fringed the coastline, kilometers of bare land appear. The animals benefiting from the waters of the continental shelf will disappear, along with their ecosystem and their best way of life. There is also the hypothesis that meteorites hit the Earth in the Permian, one in Australia and the other in Antarctica, with terrible consequences. But it's difficult, almost 250 million years later, to be certain of the latter. In Siberia, huge quantities of magma are rising to the surface. The ground opens up, even tears for dozens and dozens of kilometers. When a lava flow takes on such proportions, we speak of traps, basaltic flows, or massive basaltic flows. This flow will last for almost 1 million years. Dust spills onto the ground, but it also invades the sky, as does the gas released in the aftermath of eruptions. As gas and dust accumulate in the sky, the atmosphere becomes stifling. The greenhouse effect and global warming are becoming increasingly serious. The Dimetrodon is exceptionally large. It could reach 4 meters or 13 feet in length, and up to 6 meters or 20 feet in height for the largest adults. It weighs up to 250 kilograms or 550 pounds. Make no mistake, despite appearances, this Dimetrodon is not a dinosaur, but a reptile of the Therapsid family. We're in the Permian, and remember, dinosaurs will arrive millions of years later. Now back to Dimetrodon. This species is often mentioned when talking about prehistoric animals. Its distinctive dorsal veil is undoubtedly a factor. However, it's not for this feature, which was very useful for regulating its temperature, that we're going to study it now, but for its status in the food chain. As you may have guessed, there's no need to drag out the suspense any longer, since that's the theme of this video. He's at the top of the food chain and one of the alpha predators. Its dentition will be the subject of our new study. Its name means 2 sizes of teeth. This gives you a little clue to the evolution of this species. The teeth on his skull are in fact of 2 different series. This makes him the precursor of the 4 types of mammalian teeth. 1 or 2 pairs of canine-like teeth are found in related members of this family. It also has a type of incisor. Another noteworthy feature of its dentition is the serrations on almost all its teeth. They appear so fine as to be mere cracks. These serve to make the teeth much sharper, enabling them to cut through the flesh of their prey. If its dentition has adapted, it is to attack a new kind of prey. The number of tetrapods and amphibians exploded during this period, and for some time already. An adversary to match these new animals was needed. To complete this armada of hunters, Dimetrodon also had olfactory epithelium in its nasal cavity, i.e., a layer of tissue that detects odors. Dimetrodon was probably able to use this sensory advantage to locate and flush out its prey. It feeds mainly on riverbanks and in shallow waters in search of amphibians, but also small fish. Although undoubtedly terrestrial, the Dimetrodon was not yet fully adapted to walking. It undulated more than it walked. Another super predator, the Lycanops, used much less energy to move, and moved with greater ease. Its name probably suggests a wolf-like appearance, and you're right to allude to it. Indeed, his name means wolf's face, and his physique denotes some lupine traits. Like the Dimetrodon, it too has a differentiation of teeth, but its most impressive feature is its enormous saber-shaped canine. It hints at what an implacable predator he was. This Gorgonopsian Therapsid moved around on all fours. Unlike the animal we met earlier, the humerus and femur are virtually vertical. In other words, it walks. But that's not all. Lycanops also has a larger, more efficient musculature. This musculature, combined with its long legs on the underside of the body, rather than on the side, also enabled it to run. Speed was therefore perhaps one of its best hunting assets. He wasn't very tall, measuring just 1 meter or 3 feet in length. He was small in size compared to other herbivores and carnivores of the same period. However, it could run faster and had more stamina. Its impressive canines promised a quick, efficient kill that left nothing to chance. That's what put him in a position of strength. Hunter, but never hunted. On land and at sea, alpha predators watch over the balance of the cycle of life. They may be scary, aggressive, and even barbaric, but they're far less so than the next ones on our list. Come with me. We're meeting at Trias. We couldn't have wished for a better entry into the Jurassic than this meeting with the god of the seas. He is extraordinary. Despite his sea monster appearance, he captivates and fascinates mankind. This marine reptile is a fish eater. In other words, it feeds on fish. Its enormous wingspan gives you an idea of the size of the prey it feeds on. As we pointed out earlier, predators adapt to the prey they feed on. Their regulatory role is essential. Biological evolution facilitates the maintenance of this balance. We're living in an age of extraordinarily large animals. Predators are therefore also very imposing animals, and do justice to the size of their meal. The Liopleurodon is without a doubt the most advanced of the pliosaurs. It is fearsome and very fast. It is one of the greatest predators of the Jurassic period. It can travel long distances, propelling itself through the water with its powerful front flippers. Its size, initially estimated at 25 meters or 80 feet, has been revised downwards in recent years. Finding the complete skeleton of a prehistoric animal is almost unheard of. After millions of years, only minute traces of their passage remain. Precious, priceless treasures. But these witnesses to a bygone age are far too small to establish with any certainty a completely realistic portrait. As we saw earlier, when we set out in search of answers about the distant past, we have to rely on the few elements found, then interpret and try to make deductions. Thanks to today's techniques, many mysteries can be solved, but mistakes are always possible. As the size of the head was disproportionately large, scientists were quick to point to an equally imposing body. Body and head are generally proportional. This is indeed the case for a very large number of species, but not in pliosaurs. That doesn't make it any less gigantic. Right before your eyes, it's an animal of over 7 meters or 23 feet that moves with spine-chilling ease. Its attitude in the water and its sweeping movements are striking. It seems to be able to fly on the open sea. His predatory instincts awakened, he propels himself through the ocean with a flick of his flippers, reaching a speed far greater than his weight and size would suggest. Often mistakenly categorized as a dinosaur, it is in fact a marine reptile. It is also sometimes confused with pliosaurs, which have long necks characteristic of their species. Pliosaurs, or pliosauroids, are reptiles with more massive heads. With its massive skull, our marine specimen is one of the pliosaurs. In fact, Liapleurodon is the perfect example of a pliosaur. A long, flattened skull, a relatively short neck, and long fins attached to a thick torso, ending in a small tail. The animal's teeth are sharp as knives, making them devastatingly sharp. They're also very long, and rival a dinosaur you know well, the T-Rex. With teeth like that and a weight approaching 2 tons, Liapleurodon was the ruler of the seas. He left nothing to chance. When he passed, chaos ensued. Fierce and dangerous, he had an insatiable appetite. How do you think this extraordinary predator managed to flush out his prey? Its size was both an advantage and a hindrance when hunting. Fish could see him coming from a distance and flee to protect themselves. You have to look at its snout to discover the answer. The front nostrils give it an extremely well-developed sense of smell, enabling it to locate prey over long distances. To do this, it channels water through its nostrils to detect the chemical secretions of surrounding animals. When a tantalizing scent is detected, it pounces on its prey with its paddle-like fins. They literally propel him through the water. He can also go at top speed if the hunt calls for it. There's another thing you need to know about this emblematic animal of the Jurassic oceans, and it's closely linked once again to its nostrils. I'm talking about its respiratory system. Although it was an aquatic animal, it couldn't breathe underwater. Like some marine animals, notably the dolphin you know so well, it had to come to the surface to take a breath of oxygen before being able to dive back to the ocean floor. Liapleurodon may have had its moments of glory, but nothing in nature is ever immutable. Life evolves, and so does everyone's position in the cycle. Despite its hunting prowess, the mosasaurs, a new species of large reptiles, managed to oust the Liapleurodon during the Cretaceous period. We'll have a chance to meet them later on in our journey. Before we enter this new Cretaceous period, we have many other apex predator species to observe. Let's get back on the road. We've got a date with the next one on the list. Meet Nothosaurus. He had a slender body, elongated neck and tail, and long limbs. Not as good a swimmer. As the pliosaurs and plesiosaurs, it was able to cope well enough in the water to flush out prey and easily meet its energy needs. Biological evolution enabled it to develop certain skills. Its palate was closed, separating the nasal passage from the oral cavity. This adaptation facilitated the ingestion of food, even when the animal was submerged in water. His skull was long and flattened, with large openings. It enabled it to swallow large prey. Its jaws were studded with sharp interlocking teeth. No animal could escape. When swimming, Nothosaurus used its tail to propel itself, and its webbed feet to steer and stabilize itself in the water. He moved by undulating his body and moving his limbs. It hunted slowly towards its prey, then accelerated sharply over the last few meters to propel its head through schools of fish and capture prey. Although it hunted ferociously in the water, it was not an exclusively aquatic animal. We might compare it to today's seals. Nothosaurus are very good hunters in the ocean, but they regularly return to the shore to rest, perhaps to mate, and also to lay their eggs. Another animal of the same genus lived in swampy regions. This is the Titanosuchus. It looks very much like a crocodile. It was 1 meter or 3 feet high, and around 3 meters or 10 feet high. Its limbs were positioned directly under its body, almost vertically, so it walked on all fours. But this quadruped, unlike others of the same era, was quite fast. It has a complex ankle joint and a kind of heel. The latter is an important feature. In fact, a tendon attached to the heel is connected to the calf, and this makes all the difference. It increases leverage and thus facilitates movement. Not only can it walk with ease on land, it can also run. That's a major advantage when it comes to surprising and hunting new prey. Its body is equipped for both attack and defense. He has nothing to fear from animals interacting with the same ecosystem as he does. He was equipped with effective protective armor. Its entire body, including its belly, was covered with thick bony plates called scutes. They formed a veritable suit of armor. Let's continue our journey with the phytosaurs. They too have much to teach us. Phytosaurs resemble crocodiles in silhouette. Despite this deceptive appearance, they are not crocodiles. Their nostrils, for example, are not located at the tip of the snout, but higher up in front of the eyes. This characteristic enabled them to conceal their presence. They could breathe while remaining almost submerged, leaving only the nostril hole and the tip of the skull protruding out of the water. There were 2 main types of phytosaur. They can be distinguished by their jaws. First, there were those with long, narrow jaws lined with conical teeth. These were sharp and interlocked to grip fish firmly. This tooth arrangement is often found in underwater predators. There's a reason for this. They can plant a fish and grasp it firmly while flushing out the water from the sides of the mouth before swallowing. The other group includes phytosaurs with short, wide, and very powerful jaws. The front teeth are fang-like and the rear teeth bladed. The fang-like teeth protrude from the mouth, while the back teeth are curved. Thanks to this type of jaw, as well as its predatory physique, this phytosaur was able to attack large land-dwelling tetrapods when they came to drink at the waterhole, in the manner of today's crocodilians. From these early encounters, you might think that the biggest predators of the time inevitably had the appearance of a crocodile. No, the next one on the list looks nothing like a crocodile, but I can assure you, he's just as scary as they come. Here's one of the most ferocious carnivores the Earth has ever known. Everything about him exudes violence and barbarity. He's equipped with the finest hunting weapons. His body is voluminous, measuring around 9 to 10 meters or 33 feet long, almost 3 meters or 10 feet high, and weighing no less than 2 tons. Its sheer mass is frightening enough to scare off even the most reckless of dinosaurs. Its bones are heavy and strong. Its legs are long and its front legs shorter. It moves with confidence on its hind legs alone. Its long tail, undulating from left to right, acts as a pendulum, helping it to maintain balance during its movements. Its well-developed musculature and articulations enable it to be quite fast when compared to other dinosaurs of the same era. Fossilized footprints confirm this hypothesis. We are therefore dealing with a fast predator. Its front and rear legs are equipped with sharp claws. They don't hesitate to use them to lacerate the flesh of their prey and cause serious injuries. As if such claws weren't enough for Megalosaurus, they're not its only weapons. It has powerful jaws lined with large, razor-sharp, curved teeth. They're real cutthroats. It can slice, tear, and devour its prey with incredible violence. He's so formidable he'll stop at nothing. It never shudders or runs away. It even attacks large sauropods. Megalosaurus was a dangerous and fearsome carnivore. As you can see, this one attacks a Bonthriospondylis. Unfortunately for the Bonthriospondylis, it soon passes from life to death. This scene takes us out of the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous. This is undoubtedly the era that saw the most appalling predators of all time. I hope your heart's in the right place. These animals are dangerous, aggressive, and violent. After their passage, the landscape is synonymous with chaos. There's nothing left but the scent of fear and the acrid smell of blood. The greatest predators of all time were undoubtedly Carcharodontosaurus, Gigantosaurus, T-Rex, and Spinosaurus. Spinosaurus seems to be the most imposing of them all. Carcharodontosaurus outstrips Gigantosaurus and T-Rex itself. Let's meet each of them and learn more about their species. How did they rise to the top of the food chain? What were their hunting skills? What makes them apex predators? There's only one way to find out. Meet them and study them up close. Faster, bigger, but less intelligent than the T-Rex, the Gigantosaurus made a name for itself in the Cretaceous. It weighed around 10 tons and measured almost 15 meters or 50 feet in length. There is some speculation that this giant lizard could have taken on titanic herbivores such as Argentinosaurus. Bones of this mastodon have indeed been found close to Gigantosaurus. A predator-prey relationship is therefore plausible. Even so, it's hard to imagine that an animal weighing just 10 tons, however ferocious and powerful, could rival the 80 tons of this gigantic herbivore. One possibility that could explain and confirm this predator-prey relationship would be a pack hunting style. Gigantosaurus probably formed very small groups, limited to 2 or 3 individuals, and gathered only to hunt. This is one of the first animals on our list to rely on the power and efficiency of the group to hunt. Others, just as dangerous, acted alone, but they were no less formidable for all that. Meet the Carcharodontosaurus. It has phenomenal strength. It measures between 12 and 13 meters, or 40 feet according to the latest estimates, and weighs between 6 and 8 tons. Its disproportionate size and power make it an outstanding hunter and a sovereign predator on its home turf. His femur alone measures 1 meter, 26 or 4 feet. Can you imagine? Just one part of his leg was the size of an 8-year-old child. He hunted a wide variety of species, even large herbivores, without fear. He was so feared that he would even steal prey freshly hunted by other predators. None of them would have risked combat to recover their property. His posture and charisma alone frightened any terrestrial creature that crossed his path. even from a distance. His insatiable appetite, aggressive nature, and dangerousness were known to all. Look at its mouth, it's gigantic. She's 1 meter 60, or 5 feet long, the average height of a 14-year-old teenager. But it's also a formidable weapon. Her teeth are sharp and razor sharp. Given the size of her skull, you can imagine that her teeth are also very long, over 15 centimeters or 6 inches. Each of his teeth is almost the size of a human hand. Look at yours. Imagine dozens of teeth as long as that, solid as rock and sharp as an axe. No animal could resist a Carcharodontosaurus bite. Despite its extraordinary abilities, over time it gave way to another alpha predator, undoubtedly more intelligent and better adapted to its environment, the Tyrannosaurus rex. Did you know that the first Tyrannosaurus appeared around 140 million years ago, barely larger than a human? Such was the case of Nanuqsaurus hoaglandii. But towards the end of the Cretaceous, tens of millions of years later, they began to evolve into animals resembling the T-Rex you know. He's undoubtedly one of the most popular dinosaurs. When we think of the dinosaur period, it's often his name that springs to mind. It's also well known for its ferocity. In fact, its aggressiveness, violence, and insatiable predatory instincts have earned it the name of king of the tyrant reptiles. It could easily reach a length of 12 to 14 meters, or 43 feet, a height of 5 to 6 meters, or 16 feet, and a weight flirting with 7 tons. Like the previous dinosaurs we studied, it had a large skull, up to 1.50 meters long, or 5 feet. Armed with some 60 teeth, 10 to 15 centimeters, or 4 inches long, some as long as 18 centimeters or 7 inches, perfectly sharpened and saber-sharp, its mouth could have swallowed a whole man without difficulty. They were always effective and hardly ever wore out. Every 2 to 6 years, a new army of razor-sharp teeth sprang from its jaws. Some paleontologists also believe that the unusually large cranial surfaces behind the Tyrannosaurus's eyes must have housed extremely powerful chewing muscles. In addition to its teeth and powerful jaws, Tyrannosaurus had many other assets that put it right at the top of the podium among the world's greatest predators. He has stereoscopic vision. In other words, he has relief vision and a very good sense of distance. Each of his eyes provides a clear image at a certain viewing angle. Taken together and superimposed, these images provide the depth needed to assimilate distances. This also enabled him to register the slightest movement with a fairly wide field of vision. For a predator, this kind of visual capacity is a precious asset if you never want to miss your prey. The T-Rex was also robust and enduring. Walking for a whole day at an average speed of 8 kilometers didn't frighten it. His body took him where his sense of smell led him. He could also be fast if the occasion presented itself, such as a hunting opportunity. Tyrannosaurus could reach speeds of 25 kilometers per hour, or 40 miles per hour, with strides of around 3.75 meters, or 12 feet. The dinosaur is an emblematic animal of the Cretaceous period. Its predatory characteristics are unquestionable. In fact, that's what it's famous for. 6 meters or 20 feet high, up to 18 meters or 60 feet long, and weighing almost 11 tons, it's a real monster, a Cretaceous titan. In appearance, it could be described as a giant crested lizard. The first striking thing about this dinosaur is its size, far greater than that of the Tyrannosaurus, which has become a benchmark in its class. But there's more. A long jaw and an army of fine razor-sharp teeth leave no doubt as to its diet. In its belly, scientists have noted the presence of fish scales, as well as those of other animals, notably land animals. The appeal of this singular dinosaur lies in the way it moves, the environment in which it lives, and the ambiguity of its diet and hunting habits. While Spinosaurus is unquestionably terrestrial, it is also an underwater animal. This is one of the features that fascinates dinosaur enthusiasts. The lower part of its jaw already gave some clues to its mixed lifestyle. This terrestrial animal feeds on fish, but it was its bones, and in particular its femur, that shed further light on the mystery. Proportionally, Spinosaurus's femur is much shorter than that of its terrestrial tetrapod contemporaries. Another important anatomical feature is the shape of its feet. The bones of its feet were flat, and the claws of its toes were rather large. This tells us that while it could move about on land, the action required a great deal of energy. For an alpha predator like this to be able to sustain itself and hunt prey, it couldn't afford to encounter such difficulties in its movements. This proves that he didn't live on the mainland all the time, but that he sometimes went into the water, at least to feed. The very nature of its bones validates this hypothesis. The bones of terrestrial predators, such as the T-Rex we mentioned earlier, are longer, lighter, and composed of cavities. These characteristics made walking on land easier. Spinosaurus, on the other hand, has solid bones more akin to certain marine animals. It is this high bone density in the limbs that would have enabled this dinosaur to remain submerged in water, rather than floating. Once again, this suggests an animal capable of moving through water. With nostrils ideally located at the top of the head to prevent water from seeping in, we could be dealing with a swimmer. However, despite its undisputed swimming ability, it seems that the remains of land animals found in its belly are also evidence of this dinosaur's opportunistic side. Some modern-day animals are too, like the grizzly bear. It is an outstanding fisherman, and fish remains its favorite food. But if the opportunity arises or the fishing isn't good, it's easily tempted by other types of prey. There's every reason to believe that Spinosaurus falls into the category of opportunistic animal. Equally at home in the water or on land, it was one of the greatest land carnivores of all time. He sits proudly on the podium of the world's most accomplished and terrifying alpha predators. Previously, we met a pliosaur. This time, our journey gives us the opportunity to study a plesiosaur. You'll be able to see for yourself the major differences between these two families. The plesiosaur has been the subject of many legends, such as Loch Ness, and has also inspired great names in literature, such as Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. But as fascinating as these legends are, it's not for its fame that we're going to study it here, but for its abilities as an apex predator. The Plesiosaurus, Hydrotherosaurus, Alexandrae, measures around 8 meters or 26 feet. It fishes with its 6-meter or 20-foot long neck. Its neck measures almost 2/3 of its body. It has no fewer than 60 vertebrae. Its head, on the other hand, is tiny in proportion to its neck, measuring a mere 30 centimeters. But that didn't stop it from hungrily devouring ammonites, belemnites, fish, and even marine reptiles. For the record, the fossils of this sea behemoth were discovered by Annie Montague Alexander. The dinosaur was named in her honor. The marine reptile we're about to see is frightening, as much for its colossal dimensions as for its uncommon predatory abilities. Tylosaurus was the largest of them all. This Mosasaurus must have reached almost 18 meters or 60 feet in length, and weighed up to 15 tons. 15 tons of fearsome danger. Its large head is reminiscent of a crocodile, but a crocodile of inordinate size. The body, meanwhile, is a clever blend of snake and fish. Despite these extraordinary dimensions, the mastodon moves with great ease. It is equipped with powerful fins that allow it to steer as it pleases, but also to move fast enough never to miss its target. Even if the mere idea of him opening his mouth makes your blood run cold, you absolutely must take a closer look at his teeth. They're numerous and razor sharp. As you can see, it also has a second set of teeth in its upper palate. Once the prey has been swallowed, it has no chance of escaping. It could take on any aquatic species that crossed its path. Nothing resisted him. He could eviscerate any prey in seconds. Fish, squid, plesiosaurs such as the Elasmosaurus, pterosaurs, sea turtles, and even other mosasaurs were all within his grasp, if his territorial mind was anything to go by. It also used its long snout to strike and stun its prey. Its skull alone could reach 1 meter, 20, or 4 feet. Look how easily this Mosasaurus, Tylosaurus, captures a pteranodon. It seems to appear out of nowhere. He manages to propel himself out of the water and makes short work of the bird. He reigns supreme in the oceans, decimating even the biggest sharks of his day. He spread terror wherever he went. For all the violence he was capable of, given the sheer size of the animals living at the time, without an alpha predator of this stature, the regulation and biodiversity of marine species would have been compromised. It played an essential role in the oceans throughout its reign, until it disappeared, as did many of its contemporaries after the Cretaceous crisis. If meteorites and volcanoes are going to have a terrible impact on Earth, they're also going to seriously shake up the marine environment. Earthquakes, tsunamis, heat waves, and sudden drops in temperature have altered the biotype we mentioned at the very start of our trip. As you now know, biotope and biocenosis are closely linked. For an ecosystem to survive, the fragile balance between one and the other must be maintained. The land-based activities of the time upset this balance. The biotope, then the biocenosis, would suffer the dramatic consequences of these upheavals. First of all, in the Siberian traps, volcanic eruptions released large quantities of carbon dioxide, undoubtedly acidifying the waters of oceans, rivers, and small streams. The change in pH caused the death of the most fragile species, such as shell plankton and ammonites. The loss of these animals then impacts the rest of the food chain. A new mass extinction loomed on the horizon. But it was the fall of the famous meteorite a few thousand years later that did the damage to many species. It was the domino effect on a massive scale. Many animals became extinct, forever marking the history of life. Nevertheless, some of these animals did not disappear completely from the face of the earth. Even today, turtles and crocodiles are precious witnesses to this tumultuous past.